The grand ballroom buzzed with the scent of luxury and the thrum of ambition. An electric current of unspoken rules woven into every glance and gesture. At the center of this glittering constellation stood Julian Mercer, a man who didn't just bend the rules, he erased them and drafted his own. Tonight, he unveiled his boldest revision yet, a breathtaking young intern named Lyanna on his arm. She was more than a date. She was a symbol of power, of conquest, of unapologetic confidence. Julian believed his pregnant wife, Zoe, was safely sidelined, a silent footnote in his rise to the top. But Zoe was about to prove that the sharpest minds are the ones you never see coming. She wasn't showing up to weep. She was arriving to reclaim. The annual gala of Stratus Ventures wasn't merely a party, it was a coronation, a celebration of Julian Mercer, the brilliant founder and CEO whose meteoric rise had become legend. This year, the event took place in the gleaming angular halls of the MoMA in Midtown Manhattan, a venue as sleek and provocative as Julian himself. The guest list read like the front page of Forbes. Venture capital magnates, hedge fund legends, and the city's power brokers, all moving through the space like exotic creatures in an illuminated ocean. Light from the suspended crystal sculptures caught on diamond earrings and the glossy sheen of Rolex sky dwellers. Champagne, vintage and extravagant, flowed freely, and at the epicenter Julian stood 41 years old and untouchable in his custom Zegnyat tux. His charisma was a weapon, smiling as he built empires or ended careers. With a net worth touching 10 figures, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and a resume of accolades that earned him headlines, Julian Mercer had it all. He also had a wife, Dr. Zoe Alden, a woman whose calm brilliance stood in perfect contrast to his roaring charm. But tonight, Zoe wasn't seen. The official explanation shared in hushed tones by senior executives and their couture-clad partners was that her high-risk pregnancy, now in its 8th month, demanded strict bed rest. It sounded reasonable, gentle even. They imagined her tucked into their penthouse suite, serene and glowing, the picture of patient devotion, the goddess waiting at home. It was a lie Julian had carefully orchestrated. The serene image was a fabrication, one Julian had constructed with deliberate care. The truth was, Zoe hadn't even been invited. Their marriage, once a symphony of intellect and ambition, had deteriorated into a cold war waged in the cavernous quiet of their penthouse. To Julian, Zoe's pregnancy wasn't a miracle. It was ballast. Her body, once magnetic and desired, had become a mere vessel. Her brilliance, once the secret edge that sharpened his climb, now felt like a threat to his dominance. He began to treat her like a fragile, decorative relic, something to admire from afar, but never truly engage with. He had convinced himself she was delicate. He had forgotten. She was forged, not in fragility but in fire. Zoe, a behavioral economist with a PhD from Yale, had once lit up think tanks and advisory boards. Years ago, she chose a quieter path, one designed to support Julian's meteoric rise. She had a gift for decoding people, reading the twitches of a brow, the timing of a breath, the faintest inflection of deception. For years, she had been Julian's edge, his strategist in the shadows. But as Stratus Ventures grew, so did Julian's ego, ballooning until there was no room left for her counsel. She had gone from co-architect of his empire to an inconvenient ornament. And into that growing void stepped Lyanna Dre. Lyanna was 23, a marketing intern with ocean blue eyes and a firecracker ambition that made her impossible to ignore. She was a reflection of the man Julian had once been, of the fire he feared he was losing. She looked at him with pure, unfiltered reverence, the kind Zoe's seasoned eyes could no longer replicate. To Julian, Lyanna wasn't just a lover. She was proof, Proof that he still had it, that he was still the bold innovator, not a man approaching 40, shackled by responsibility. Tonight was Liana's unspoken debut. Bringing her to the gala wasn't just bold, it was reckless, a blatant violation of the unspoken codes of his world. But Julian had never feared risk. His success had been built on it. He craved the rush, the sense that he could manipulate fate and escape unscathed. He believed his status made him untouchable. He believed Zoe, hidden away and swollen with child, was powerless. It was his gravest miscalculation. From his vantage at the carved marble bar, Julian scanned the glittering room like a monarch surveying his domain. 2 champagne flutes chilled in his hands. He waited, heart steady with confidence, for Liana to return from the powder room. The night felt invincible. Everyone in the room revolved around him, some in admiration, others in envy, all in quiet submission. Julian knew it. He fed on it, and tonight he would unveil a new star in his constellation, one he shaped with precision. This was his universe, and every orbit obeyed his gravity. Liana Dre stepped out of the powder room like a cinematic reveal, a ripple in the air. The crimson silk of her gown sliced through the sea of charcoal, navy, and silver like a defiant flare. The dress gripped her youthful frame, a stark counterpoint to the soft, rounded grace of the woman she was meant to replace. She wore her beauty like an unspoken promise, untouched, temporary, irresistible. As she wore her way through the elite and the powerful, her expression danced between wide-eyed wonder and carefully calculated confidence. She was performing, and she was performing flawlessly. Julian's eyes found her instantly. His trademark smile unfolded like a signature only she could read. He intercepted her halfway, offering her a flute of champagne. "There you are," he murmured, his tone low and rich, intimate, but loud enough for curious ears nearby. "I was starting to think you'd left me." "Never, Julian," Liana whispered, brushing his arm lightly with her fingertips. The gesture, small, intimate, unmistakably familiar, sent a ripple of stunned silence through the executives within view. This was Liana Dre, the intern, the girl who arranged meetings and fetched espresso, and she was touching the CEO like she belonged to him. Julian drank in the room's reaction, each slack jaw and widened eye, a silent triumph. This was the moment. He led Liana on a slow, controlled loop through the ballroom like a collector parading his most prized artifact. He didn't introduce her as a lover. That would be too crude. No, the deception was far more refined, wrapped in the glossy veneer of mentorship. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Liana Dre," Julian announced to a circle of stone-faced executives. "She's one of our brightest up-and-comers in marketing, a real star in the making. I've taken her under my wing. It's part of our commitment to cultivating future leaders at Stratus." The executives, seasoned professionals with families, mortgages, and careers tethered to Julian's approval, nodded politely. They forced smiles, their expressions tight with the weight of implication. They saw his hands settle at the small of Liana's back, the quiet possessiveness in his gaze, the soft flush in her cheeks. They knew the truth, even if it wore the costume of mentorship, and they said nothing. Complicity, after all, was the currency of survival. Just a few feet away, Serena Dre, head of legal and notorious for her razor wit, watched the performance with open disdain. She'd known Julian for over a decade. She'd crafted the airtight contracts that armored his empire, and she had been there the day he married Zoe. She considered Zoe a friend, or as close to one as her guarded temperament allowed. Now her eyes found Michael Fong, the CFO, who perpetually looked like he'd slept in his office chair, and for good reason. Michael's face was a collage of alarm and calculation, each tick of his jaw measuring the fallout. A scandal this public could send investors into a panic and cost the company millions in market value. "He's completely lost it," Serena muttered, swallowing a stiff sip of her gin martini. "This isn't impulsive," Michael whispered back, adjusting his glasses with a shaky hand. "This is corporate suicide. He's not thinking," Serena corrected sharply. "He's feeling, and right now he feels invincible." Julian, either unaware or wholly indifferent to their disapproval, pressed forward in his showcase. He introduced Liana to a high-ranking member of the city council, a tech influencer with a global following and a visiting venture capitalist from Hong Kong. With each encounter, his confidence swelled. The flattery toward Liana became more lavish, the space between their bodies more intimate. Julian was drunk, not on alcohol, but on his own audacity. He was crafting a story live and unfiltered, a bold rewrite where he was the visionary unchained, free from convention, and untethered from the woman waiting in silent exile at home. Liana, for her part, was swept away by the storm. This was the world she had fantasized about. Men she'd seen on magazine covers were now shaking her hand, nodding thoughtfully as she spoke, whether or not they were actually listening. She stood next to power incarnate, basking in its glow. And in that warmth, she missed the warning signs. Julian's recklessness looked to her like strength, his arrogance like confidence. She thought she was on the brink of everything she had ever wanted. The peak of the evening and the nadir of Julian's judgment came with the sharp clink of silver on glass. He tapped the edge of his champagne flute, commanding the room's attention. The low hum of conversation ebbed into stillness. Liana stood beside him, her hand laced with his. Around them, colleagues, clients, board members, all eyes now riveted. "My friends," Julian began, his voice smooth and sure, the cadence of a seasoned orator, "thank you for being here tonight to celebrate another remarkable year at Stratus Ventures." He paused, letting the gravity settle. "We've shattered records, broken barriers, and proven time and again why we are leaders in innovation. But success is about more than numbers. It's about people. It's about nurturing brilliance and believing in the future." His eyes dropped to Liana, his expression softening into something that feigned paternal pride, but convinced no one. "It's about discovering the rare few who carry within them the spark, the drive, the clarity to shape the future," Julian continued, lifting his glass. "So let's raise a toast not just to what we've accomplished, but to what's still to come, to innovation, to risk, to daring ideas, and to the luminous talents that will light our path forward." He squeezed Liana's hand. "To the future." "To the future," the crowd echoed. A dissonant mix of admiration, jealousy, and barely concealed contempt. The toast, though couched in corporate language, was unmistakable in its real intent. It was a veiled tribute to his own betrayal, a brazen blessing over his affair, delivered in front of his peers, mentors, and subordinates. A masterclass in arrogance. Julian drank deeply from his glass, the champagne fizzing with the aftertaste of self-congratulation. And then it happened. At the precise moment his confidence crested, the grand entrance doors, untouched since the evening began, swung open in ghostly silence. The effect was immediate. Not a gasp, not a word, but a collective breath held. The atmosphere didn't just shift, it snapped. Every murmur evaporated, sucked into the sudden void of sound. Heads turned with eerie synchronicity from the interns nearest the door to Julian Mercer himself, now frozen mid-toast. There, standing in the halo of ambient lobby light, was a figure. For a beat, no one moved. Then reality caught up to vision. The room processed what should have been impossible. It was Dr. Zoe Alden. She wasn't the fragile, bedridden woman of Julian's curated fiction. She wasn't cloistered away in silence. She was radiant, formidable. Her gown was a deep emerald velvet, regal and commanding, tailored to honor her 8-month pregnancy, not to hide it. It flowed over her belly like armor. Her dark hair was swept into a sleek chignon, exposing the elegant precision of her features. Her gaze moved across the crowd, calm, knowing, unshaken. She didn't look like a woman abandoned. She looked like a sovereign stepping into her throne room. But Zoe wasn't alone. To her right stood Malcolm Hurst, chairman of Stratus Ventures, a titan in his late 60s, silver-haired, steely, a man whose mere glance could unravel hostile acquisitions. Malcolm never appeared at public functions. His domain was the boardroom. His presence here was an earthquake in a tuxedo. He hovered near Zoe's elbow, not as a chaperone, but as a guard. To her left stood the remainder of the board of directors. There stood Evelyn Shaw, the razor-sharp former CEO of a rival tech conglomerate, someone Julian had spent years persuading to join his board. Beside her, General Preston, a retired 4-star commander with a legendary reputation in logistics, and flanking them, Kenji Morita, the quiet yet commanding head of a Japanese investment house that controlled a substantial share of Stratus Ventures. None of them smiled. None looked remotely festive. They were not here for a celebration. They were here for a reckoning. Their faces were carved from the same stone, impassive, unyielding, severe. The image was damning. This wasn't a scorned wife staging a scene. It was a calculated strategic ambush, a precise and devastating strike. Julian remained frozen on the small platform, still gripping Liana's hand. The color drained from his face, replaced by a blotchy, sickly pore. His once proud grin had dissolved into slack-jawed disbelief in a heartbeat. His universe, the one he controlled so meticulously, was coming apart. All his power, his certainty, his illusion of invulnerability, gone in the steady gaze of the woman he had dismissed. His eyes bounced from Zoe to Malcolm Hurst, and for the first time in a very long time, something unfamiliar bloomed in his chest. Fear, cold, visceral, unmistakable. Liana, the would-be rising star, appeared to deflate beside him. The crimson silk of her dress now screamed instead of shimmered. Too loud, too cheap. The admiration that had once filled her eyes was rapidly being replaced with confusion. Then dread. She wasn't the star anymore. She was collateral, caught in a battle she never realized was unfolding. Her hand slipped from Julian's, damp with sweat. The silence was suffocating. The only sound came from the faint notes of ambient lobby music, a jarring contrast to the graveyard stillness that had fallen inside. Then Zoe moved just one step, slow, deliberate. The click of her heel echoed across the ballroom like a verdict being read. She advanced, not with the awkward shuffle of late-age pregnancy, but with the unflinching calm of authority incarnate. Malcolm and the board moved in unison beside her, a wall of power cutting a path through the stunned crowd. The guests parted instinctively, recoiling as if before royalty or wrath. City officials, influencers, executives, all lowered their gazes, desperate to avoid association with the man on the stage. Zoe ignored them. Her focus was locked, precise. There was only one person she had come for. Her husband. This was not about the mistress. Liana was merely a symptom, a side effect. Zoe was there for the source. She had come to dismantle the disease itself. As Zoe approached the stage, the entire narrative of the evening was upended in an instant. This was no longer Julian's night, no longer about his audacity or control. Now it was about Zoe's arrival. And every person in the ballroom understood with a clarity that froze their blood that this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of Julian's unraveling. The distance from the grand entrance to the foot of the platform, felt to Julian like the final mile of a marathon he hadn't realized he was running. His breath, once easy and dominant, now came in shallow, panicked gasps. Zoe stopped directly before him. She lifted her gaze. Though the platform gave Julian physical height, he had never felt smaller, never felt so utterly exposed. He forced a sound, half voice, half cough, a pitiful echo of the confidence he once wielded. "Zoe, what is this? What are you doing here? You were supposed to be resting." His eyes darted to Malcolm Hurst, desperate for an anchor in a moment that felt like drowning. "Malcolm, what's going on? You're frightening everyone." Malcolm didn't blink. Instead, he stepped forward, inserting his presence between Zoe and Julian like a curtain of unyielding power. His tone, when he finally spoke, had none of the cordial diplomacy of a chairman addressing his CEO. It was cold. It was personal. "Are you all right, my dear?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine concern, directed solely at Zoe. She nodded once, calm and assured. "I'm perfectly fine, Uncle Malcolm. Thank you for asking." A wave of astonished whispers swept through the nearby guests. Those close enough to hear the exchange gasped softly. "Uncle Malcolm." The words detonated like a second bombshell. Julian's mind spiraled. He had known Zoe had a godfather, an elusive Uncle Malcolm. She rarely mentioned a retired financier, she'd said, someone who quietly oversaw her family's modest estate. He remembered a brief meeting years ago, a handshake at a family holiday gathering, a forgettable moment. He had never, not once, connected that mild-mannered figure from Zoe's past with Malcolm Hurst, the commanding chairman who controlled the fate of his company. And now he realized he had spent years trying to win over a man who already knew everything the board had known. Of course they had. And in that knowledge, their grim expressions now made chilling sense. This wasn't just corporate maneuvering. This was deeply, dangerously personal. They weren't merely backing a vote. They were backing blood. A member of the family. Malcolm turned his icy gaze back to Julian. The polite mask was gone. "Mercer," he said, the name striking the air like a shard of glass. "You seem to be operating under several false assumptions. The first," he continued, "is that you have any authority over where my goddaughter chooses to stand. And the second, far more important, is this illusion that your guests' comfort is our concern tonight." He swept a cold hand in the direction of the stunned crowd. "The party is over. On behalf of the board of directors of Stratus Ventures, I'm asking all non-essential personnel to exit the building immediately. Thank you for your service. Your cars are waiting." A long pause. Then the room erupted into frantic, breathless motion. No one needed a second prompt. It was a slow-motion stampede. Heels clattered, glasses fell, luxury fabrics rustled like dry leaves in a storm. The city's elite fled, desperate to escape the crossfire of a corporate execution. Within minutes, the ballroom was a hollow shell. All that remained were Julian and Liana, still frozen on the platform and the quiet tribunal facing them. Zoe, her hand, now protectively resting on her stomach, stood with unshakable stillness. Behind her, the entire board of directors of Stratus Ventures. The once sparkling decorations and half-finished flutes of champagne now looked absurd, remnants of a celebration that had died in flames. Julian's fear gave way to something hotter. Anger, righteous, indignant, furious. The audacity to be ambushed, to be humiliated in his sanctuary. "This is madness," he hissed, voice trembling with rage. "You can't do this. This is my company, my event." He whipped toward Zoe, his face contorted in disbelief and fury. "And you planned this circus. After everything I've given you, I told you to stay home." But Zoe didn't flinch. She didn't meet him with the broken eyes of a betrayed wife. She looked at him like a physician observing a dying delusion. Detached, precise. "You're mistaken, Julian," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, but edged in surgical steel. "You didn't give me anything. We were supposed to be partners. And as for home, my home lies where my family's legacy is protected, where our interests are upheld." She gently patted her belly. "My home is with this child, and with the inheritance my father entrusted to Uncle Malcolm to safeguard." She let the silence settle before delivering the final blow. "A legacy," she said coolly, "that includes a 12% founding stake in Stratus Ventures held in a blind trust under my name." Julian's mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for oxygen on a marble deck. 12%, Zoe repeated softly. Enough to make her the second largest individual shareholder in the company. He had always thought her family's money was old, irrelevant, some dusty lineage with no bearing on real power. Never once had it crossed his mind that it was embedded in the very architecture of his own success. Finally, Julian's panicked gaze landed on Leanna, as if truly seeing her for the first time. She wasn't a symbol of his dominance anymore. She was a mirror reflecting the magnitude of his failure. She stood paralyzed, pale with dread, her expression a watercolor of shame and fear. Her scarlet dress now looked ridiculous, a cheap costume in a ballroom drained of color and meaning. Zoe followed his gaze, then with a flick of her eyes, dismissed Leanna like a failed audition. "This," Zoe said, her voice smooth and sharp, "is what you were willing to destroy everything for. A girl playing make-believe. You didn't just underestimate me, Julian. You underestimated the entire foundation of your life." Her words cut through the still air, precise, unforgiving. She dismantled his pride with the elegance of a scalpel. The twist wasn't just that Malcolm was her godfather. It was that Zoe had never been the passive spouse he assumed. She had always been a silent partner, a force. And now she was here to collect on what was hers. The emptiness of the ballroom was heavy. Every breath, every blink, every shift of weight echoed in the stillness. Julian's fury, which had burned so fiercely only moments ago, sputtered out against the glacial calm of Zoe's resolve. He was collapsing under the gravity of his own ignorance. "A 12% stake," he gasped. The words caught brittle in his throat. That's impossible. I vetted everything I went through." "You vetted?" Zoe interrupted, her tone chillingly even. "Exactly what I allowed you to see. The trust was created by my father long before I ever met you. It was structured for discretion. You saw the institution, not the beneficiary. You were so absorbed in your own genius, it never occurred to you that my family might possess brilliance of its own." She stepped closer to the stage. Julian had to look down at her now, but all the height in the world couldn't lift him above her. "You saw Dr. Zoe Alden," she said, "the academic, the supportive wife. You never thought to ask about the details of that modest trust that paid for my education at Yale in full, that let me support us while you were building apps in a basement and eating canned beans. That seed money, Julian, where did you think it came from?" The sky. Each question was a precise incision, dismantling the carefully crafted legend of the self-made man. Julian had rewritten their shared history, placing himself at its center, the lone visionary who dragged them both from obscurity to greatness. But Zoe was here to correct the record. She hadn't been a passenger. She had paved the road. Julian's eyes darted around, searching for a way out, a crack in the fortress now encasing him. But there was no escape. The board stood like sentinels, their expressions stone cold. Judgment had already been passed. His panic turned vicious. He spun toward the only other target left. "Get out," he snarled at Leanna, who recoiled as though struck. "This has nothing to do with you. Leave." Leanna's eyes flicked between Julian's twisted expression and Zoe's composed stare. She was a pawn trapped in a game whose rules she had never understood. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, tears brimmed in her eyes. She gathered the hem of her crimson gown, turned, and fled. Her heels echoed in a frantic, syncopated rhythm until she vanished through a side exit. A ghost of Julian's greatest miscalculation. He didn't look after her. His attention was fixed, trembling on Zoe. "So, this is what it's about," he sneered, reaching for the only weapon he had left. Narrative control. Money. You find out you've got a little leverage and decide to stage this theater for a bigger slice of the pie. Is that it? A faint, almost pitying smile ghosted across Zoe's lips. "Divorce?" she echoed softly. "Oh, Julian, you're still 3 moves behind. A divorce is a negotiation between equals. You and I are no longer equals." It was then that Malcolm stepped forward, his voice a low, thunderous warning. "Mercer," he said with finality, "stop talking. You're compounding an already catastrophic situation." He glanced at Zoe, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded once. It was time. "You see, Julian," Zoe said, her tone now cooled to something clinical. "Dissecting your affair, that was the spark. The humiliation you handed me in public, that was the trigger. But the betrayal," she continued, "that ran deeper. It wasn't the heartbreak, it was the insult. The idea that you thought I was too stupid to notice." She began to pace slowly before the stage, each step deliberate, her voice unflinching. "I started small. The client gifts that never hit official ledgers. The inexplicable offshore holding company in the Cayman Islands. You used to tell me I didn't understand your business, but I do understand patterns. I understand behavior. And yours, Julian, became erratic, desperate." Julian's face went stiff, pale, and brittle. This was no longer just about marital betrayal. It had crossed into dangerous territory. Territory where legal consequences replaced broken hearts. "I didn't need to hire a private investigator to uncover Liana," Zoe said, waving a hand dismissively. "A girl like that leaves a trail of digital breadcrumbs half the internet could follow." "No," she continued, her voice tightening. "I reserved my resources for something that mattered. I hired a team of forensic accountants, the best people who can spot a missing decimal in a mountain of manipulated numbers." She stopped pacing, locked eyes with him. Those eyes, once captivating, now looked like loaded barrels aimed directly at his soul. "What I found, Julian," she said, "wasn't just infidelity. It was a full-scale symphony of fraud." General Preston, the logistics specialist on the board, cleared his throat. "Mercer," he said, "we have the preliminary report. It's comprehensive." Evelyn Shaw, the sharp-edged former CEO, chimed in with her signature bluntness. "Project Nightshade ring any bells?" Julian froze. His stomach dropped. His veins ran ice. Project Nightshade, the secret project he had buried so deep he was sure no one would ever find it. His desperate last hope, a bloated, hemorrhaging biotech startup that had never made it out of clinical proof. He had been funneling millions from Stratus Ventures to keep it afloat, betting everything that someday it would pay off, that it would be his legacy. It had become a black hole, and for the last year and a half, he had been illegally sustaining it through shell transfers and falsified records. He thought no one knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," he mumbled, but it was a useless lie. The sweat crawling across his brow betrayed the truth. Zoe's expression didn't change. She simply shook her head. "No more lies, Julian. It's over. We know everything. The shell companies, the fake invoices, the supplier kickbacks. We know you leveraged company assets for personal loans without board knowledge, without shareholder disclosure." She let the words settle. The silence afterward felt like the final click of a cell door. "You didn't bring your mistress here tonight to flaunt your success," Zoe continued, her voice calm but cutting. You brought her because tomorrow morning you were scheduled to authorize the final wire transfer for Project Nightshade. You were going to drain the last of Stratus's accessible funds, vanished to a country without an extradition treaty, and leave the rest of us to clean up the mess. Her voice dropped into a whisper, thick with contempt, more lethal than any scream. You weren't celebrating the future. You were celebrating your escape. And you just couldn't resist one last arrogant curtain call. You just couldn't help yourself, Zoe said, her voice steady. You had to rub my nose in it. And that, Julian, she locked eyes with him, was your fatal mistake. The name Project Nightshade still hung in the air like a poisonous vapor no one dared inhale. To Julian, it was the tolling of a funeral bell. His. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pallid, waxy sheen under the ballroom lights. He looked at Zoe no longer as a partner, not even as a threat, but as a prosecutor delivering the final conclusive blow. Years of careful deceit unraveled in a matter of minutes. How? He croaked. A single word. Fragile, gasping. How could you possibly know? Zoe's expression remained untouched, scientific, clinical. You seem to forget, she replied, that before I was your wife, I was a behavioral economist. I build predictive models based on irrational human behavior, and your fatal flaw has always been predictable, Julian. Your ego. She gestured subtly toward a figure near the board. Michael Fong, the CFO, who had just re-entered the room. His face was grim, still watchful. Michael and I have been in conversation for weeks. Julian's head snapped toward him. You, his voice cracked. You betrayed me. Michael adjusted his tie. His hands trembled faintly, but his voice when it came was solid. I have a fiduciary responsibility to this company and its shareholders, Mr. Mercer. My loyalty isn't to you. Not when your personal actions threaten the very foundation of what we've built. Dr. Alden brought some irregularities to my attention. At first, I doubted her, but the numbers, they don't lie. Zoe resumed, her tone slicing clean. You always thought Michael was just a numbers man, a glorified accountant. You dismissed him just like you dismissed me. You assumed his fear of you outweighed his sense of ethics. But when presented with the full scope of your embezzlement, he made the right call. Malcolm Hurst stepped forward once again, a quiet force. From inside his tailored jacket, he withdrew a slim, leather-bound folder. He didn't need to open it. The gesture was enough. The forensic report is conclusive, Malcolm said, his voice devoid of anything but finality. We have digital records of every transfer, from Stratus Ventures' operating accounts to the shell entities propping up Project Nightshade. We have sworn affidavit from 2 vendors you pressured into the kickback scheme, Evelyn Shaw added coolly, her gaze razor-sharp. They were more than willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity, and she added with a touch of bitter amusement. We have Leanna Julian blinked. Leanna? She doesn't know anything about Stratus. She was never involved in any of the business. Oh, she knows more than you think, Evelyn replied with a cold, mirthless smile. Or rather, she has more than you think. Young, ambitious women who get involved with powerful married men tend to develop insurance policies. In her case, Zoe interjected. It was a cloud backup of every single message, text, and email you ever sent her. Julian's thoughts spiraled. He tried to recall specifics, reckless boasts, veiled hints about the real project that would change everything. Angry rants about the board. It all seemed harmless then. Flirtatious, arrogant, unfiltered. It's all circumstantial, he snapped. A final bluff from a man backed into a corner. It proves nothing, just chatter. It proves motive and mindset, Zoe corrected, still composed. But you're right, it wasn't the smoking gun. That, she said, pausing for effect, came from you. Julian's body tensed. A gift. She continued, Do you remember a few weeks ago? You gave her a new laptop, top of the line, to help her with work. What you didn't know is that our IT department under Mr. Fong's supervision had already flagged you as a potential internal security risk. Michael stepped forward, voice stronger now. Every new device connected to the Stratus network is subject to an automatic security scan, especially when given inexplicably to a junior intern. On that laptop, he said, we discovered a hidden partition drive. And on that drive, Zoe took the baton, her voice sharpened to a scalpel, was a single folder. Project Nightshade. The entire plan, the falsified funding documents, the true burn rate, and most importantly, your escape plan. A detailed outline of a new identity, a one-way flight itinerary to Bias, booked for tomorrow afternoon. The silence that followed was absolute checkmate. So perfect, so brutal, so complete. Julian couldn't move, couldn't speak. He had handed them the weapon, sharpened the blade, pointed to his own neck, and they had swung. The final devastating blow didn't come from Zoe or Malcolm, or even Michael. It came from a voice Julian had long forgotten. Kenji Morita, the silent Japanese investor, spoke for the first time. His English was careful, accented, and deliberate. "Mr. Mercer?" he said, bowing his head slightly, but never breaking eye contact. "My firm invested in Stratus Ventures for its innovation, but also for its leadership. We were under the impression that leadership was a partnership between you and Dr. Alden, her family's legacy, her presence. It was seen as a symbol of long-term stability." He paused, the weight of his words pressing down like stone. "Your actions are not only criminal, they are a dishonor." Julian flinched. Kenji turned to Zoe. "My firm and the investors I represent have lost all confidence in your husband's ability to lead. But we have gained deep respect for your diligence, Dr. Alden, your integrity. We support the board's decision fully." The declaration landed like a gavel. There was no debate, no cracks, no dissension. The board stood as a single, unyielding entity. Julian had no angles left, no tactics, no leverage. He'd been too busy chasing a petty, glamorous fantasy, obsessed with seducing interns and rewriting narratives. He never saw the real war, the one Zoe had waged quietly. Strategically, a war for the company, a war he had already lost. The weight of judgment pressed down on him, a physical thing. His knees faltered beneath it. The Tom Ford suit that once made him feel invincible now clung like a burial cloth. He scanned the room. Zoe, calm and unshakable. Malcolm, righteous and still. The board, unreadable, unmerciful. No one pied him. No one offered a hand. Only silence. Only the brutal finality of consequence. His once quick mind, always ready with a pivot or deflection, was now blank. White noise, useless beast, the flight, the fantasy of freedom, all of it ashes in the fluorescent light of this impromptu tribunal. "So what now?" Julian finally asked, his voice once so commanding, now barely above a whisper. It wasn't a challenge, it was a plea, a dethroned king staring up at the blade. "You call the SEC, the police? You drag the company's name in your own through the mud?" He looked at Zoe. "Is that what you want?" It was pathetic, a last desperate appeal to shared damage, mutually assured destruction. Malcolm Hurst answered, his voice granite. "There will be no spectacle, Mercer. Not if we can avoid it. The integrity of Stratus Ventures comes first. We have a responsibility to our employees and to our investors," Malcolm Hurst said, voice cool and deliberate. "A scandal of this magnitude would devastate them." He stepped forward, not with sympathy, but with authority, and raised a hand, cutting off the faint flicker of hope Julian dared to show. "Do not mistake our discretion for mercy. You have two options, Mercer. Both end with your complete and irreversible removal from this company." He gestured toward Elena Voss, the general counsel, who had stood silent until now. Her expression unreadable, She stepped forward and placed a thin folder and a sleek pen on the stage's edge. Option 1, Malcolm continued, is the hard way. I make a single call, and within 10 minutes, detectives from the SEC's Financial Crimes Division will walk through that door. You will be arrested and charged with embezzlement, securities fraud, and half a dozen other white-collar felonies. You'll face a federal trial, likely spend the next decade behind bars. Stratus Ventures will issue a statement condemning your actions and fully cooperate with prosecutors. The company will survive, but bruised. Your name will live on as a punchline. A cautionary tale. Julian flinched. The word prison landed like a strike to the ribs. Option 2, Malcolm said, voice dropping. An octave is clean. In that folder is your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman. It includes a full transfer of your 28% stake in Stratus into the trust managed by Dr. Alden. Restitution for the money you stole. Julian's voice cracked. That's my entire stake. That's everything. It's a fraction, Evelyn Shaw snapped. A fraction of what you tried to steal and a pittance compared to what your arrogance has cost. If you sign, Malcolm continued, you walk out that door tonight. We'll announce your early retirement tomorrow due to health reasons. Quietly. Internally, we'll deal with Project Nightshade. No police, no prison, but no legacy. You'll be erased. Julian's eyes flicked from the folder to Zoe. Her face was impassive. But in her eyes, he saw something. Not hate, finality, a quiet, unshakable resolve. This wasn't revenge. It was balance. She wasn't just taking back control of Stratus. She was reclaiming her life, her safety, her child's future, everything he had gambled away. It wasn't a real choice, a diminished life or a cell. His ego shrieked, but his survival instinct, the only true God he had ever bowed to, spoke louder. Hands trembling, Julian Mercer dropped to his knees. The thousand wool of Julian's suit met the polished floor. It was the posture of a fallen monarch. He reached for the pen. His hand trembled so violently he could barely wrap his fingers around it. He uncapped it, opened the folder. The legal text blurred before his eyes, but he didn't need to read it. He knew it was the formal dissolution of his world. With a hand that barely obeyed him, he scrolled his name, a signature that had once launched a billion-dollar enterprise. Onto the resignation, then again on the share transfer. 2 strokes. That's all it took to go from kingmaker to exile. He shoved the folder away like it burned, stood stiffly, mechanically. He looked like a ghost of the man who had entered this ballroom in triumph. It's done, he said. His voice was hollow. Malcolm Hurst gave a single nod. Crisp final. Elena, he said. Elena Voss stepped forward, lifting the documents delicately like evidence in a crime scene. Julian, Malcolm said, using his first name for the last time. You have 60 seconds to leave this building. Your security detail has been dismissed. Your company accounts are frozen. A taxi is waiting. You do not return to this office. You do not return to the residence. Your personal items will be shipped wherever you instruct. You are not to contact Dr. Alden or any employee of Stratus Ventures ever again. Are we clear? Julian nodded, a single jerky movement. He looked once more at Zoe, his wife, the mother of his child, the architect of his downfall. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came. There was nothing to say. He had sworn chaos, and now at last he reaped it. He turned, not toward the main entrance, but toward the side door, Liana's door, the door for secrets, for shame. He didn't look back. The disgraced CEO vanished into shadow, leaving behind the empire he built, and the woman he fatally misjudged. The door clicked shut behind him. Zoe finally exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, a gesture of quiet protection and promise. Silence settled over the room. The war was over. What came next was hers to write. Standing in the stillness in the remnants of Julian's legacy, Zoe Alden was not a victim seeking comfort. She was a leader, surveying the domain she had just reclaimed. The board, her silent partners in this audacious surgical coup, voted unanimously. She was their new CEO. As the interim CEO of Stratus Ventures, Zoe Alden was no longer the woman behind the man. She had stepped from the shadows, no longer content to whisper into the ear of power. Now she was the voice, the presence, the cocomer. She was the go. Her pregnancy wasn't a hindrance. It was a deadline, a motivator to purge, rebuild, and craft a legacy of integrity for the child she carried. Each decision she made now was not just for shareholders or optics. It was a blueprint for Julian Mercer fated into a self-imposed exile. A man's strip, a whispered cautionary tale in boardrooms. The man who flew too close to the son who underestimated Zoe, she weaponized it. Pain be from the scorched proof that the best revenge isn't wrath, it's ass. Thank you for joining us for this tale of ambition, betrayal, and poetic justice. If you were glued to your ski, what did you think of Zoe's precision strike? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. For more twisted plots, shocking betrayals, and sweet strategic revenge, subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. And don't forget to share this with someone who loves a good corporate drama. We'll see you in the next story.
Adrian Blackwell had always believed his life was the embodiment of grandeur and invincibility. He possessed a sun-scorched clifftop estate that gazed over miles of vineyards, a business empire whose name sparkled in the financial hubs of every continent, and a wife of such poise and elegance that she turned heads in every ballroom they graced. But even the most impeccable marble can harbor invisible cracks, and the dazzling veneer of Adrian's world concealed a creeping darkness beneath its polished surface. He descended from the infamous Blackwell dynasty, a family rumored to have struck gold, literally in the opal fields of Australia, before fanning out into global real estate, cutting-edge tech, and charitable endeavors. Flip through any glossy finance rag, and there he was, Adrian, beaming with self-assured triumph, as though fate itself bent to his will. Yet behind the immaculate rose gardens and within the hush of those gilded halls, trouble brewed. Serafina Blackwell wasn't born into the same swirl of champagne and couture dresses. She came from a sleepy town near Sonoma, molded by morning shifts and honest labor. The moment Adrian blew in like a whirlwind, golden ambition blazing, she was hypnotized by his unbridled drive and the lavish horizons he promised. To their admirers, they were the picture of modern royalty, the tenacious heiress by marriage, and the unstoppable corporate titan, locked arm in arm against the world. But that flawless image began to show its seams. The hush-hush business trips to Singapore, back-to-back investor meetings in Paris, and secretive phone calls that ended the second Serafina appeared in the doorway. These were the early signs of a wall quietly rising between them. The invitations to glitzy fundraisers and star-studded launches kept rolling in, and they attended faithfully, brilliant smiles plastered for the cameras. Deep down, though, Serafina felt each day slip further into emptiness. Her texts skimmed over, her attempts at real conversation thwarted by an ever-busy Adrian who lived in his own separate sphere. Then it happened. One fleeting hug, shared with someone else behind the tinted windows of a sleek limo, an innocent gesture, or so he would claim, was enough to rattle the picture-perfect marriage to its foundations. In that single moment, the cracks Serafina had tried to mend for so long finally began to shatter, threatening to expose every secret piece of Adrian's world to a blinding spotlight. Where is everyone reading from tonight? Comment 1 if you're enthralled so far, or 2 if you think the pace should pick up. Your thoughts matter. Serafina woke one morning to find Adrian gone before dawn. Their master suite, designed to emulate old-world European luxury with Tuscan columns and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking vast vineyards, felt oddly barren. She padded across the cool marble floor, remembering the early days when even a single night apart was unthinkable. Now she counted herself lucky if she spent a weekend afternoon with him. A faint pang of loneliness settled in her chest, but she brushed it aside. After all, wasn't this the cost of success? For Serafina, the solution to that creeping emptiness had always been to pour herself into charitable works. She was a notable figure in philanthropic circles, chairing events for women's shelters, hospitals, and schools. She had raised millions for children's medical treatments across the state of California. It was an endeavor that had once served as a joint passion. Adrian's fortune and her devotion had combined to yield substantial social impact. But as his empire expanded, her personal involvement in these causes became a solitary pursuit. When she attended fundraisers, she often did so alone, always inventing a courteous excuse as to why Adrian was absent. On that particular morning, Serafina dressed in a pastel ensemble and set off to help organize a benefit concert for underprivileged youth. The crowd was lively, full of bright banners and enthusiastic volunteers. Everywhere she turned, there were grateful smiles and heartfelt thanks that momentarily filled the void Adrian had left. During a break, she stepped out to a small cafe with her friend Callista, a sharp-witted journalist who had known Serafina since college. Over steaming mugs of cappuccino, Callista's gaze lingered on Serafina's eyes. "You look tired," she said, her tone gentle yet probing. "Is everything all right at home?" Serafina forced a reassuring smile. "Adrian's busy. He's traveling. You know how it is." Callista studied her quietly. "I've seen your social media. For someone living in a mansion, you look awfully lonely." "Don't worry about me. I promise I'm fine," Serafina replied, though the strain in her voice betrayed a deeper vulnerability. She wondered how long she could keep up the charade of perfection. Feel like sharing a thought? Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to hide worries from loved ones. Hit like if you relate. That night, Adrian came home well after midnight. Exhaustion weighed heavily on his posture, and the lines around his eyes looked deeper. When Serafina peeked from their grand foyer, she saw him slump against the wall, phone in hand, typing a quick response to yet another urgent message. She stepped forward, arms folded, trying to mask her concern. "You're late," she said quietly, voice echoing through the high ceilings. He blinked as if startled to see her, then slid his phone into his jacket pocket. "I had a business dinner in the city. The negotiations went longer than expected." Her heart twitched. This was the new normal. Half explanations with just enough detail to stave off suspicion. Serafina led him to the kitchen where she'd left a plate of her homemade lasagna, warming in the oven. "I thought you might be hungry." He managed a wan smile. "Thank you." They sat in silence at the kitchen island. The hush that stretched between them weighed more than any argument. She wanted to ask him point blank, "Whose messages make you smile in the middle of dinner with me? Why do you lock yourself in the study for hours?" But fear of the answer choked her voice. After picking at his meal, Adrian sighed. "Look, I know I've been distant. I'm trying to close a major partnership that could elevate everything. The foundation, our global outreach, our name. It's complicated." Serafina forced herself to nod. "I understand." But she didn't. Not fully. The next morning, she found clues scattered around. A snippet of conversation about new philanthropic programs, hurried texts referencing Eliana, and hush-hush phone calls that ended whenever she drew near. She tried to focus on the charitable banquet she was planning, but her mind kept drifting back to those fragments of suspicion. Even so, she clung to the belief that their love story could still be saved. They had built a life together. Wasn't it worth fighting for? Little did she know, events were already in motion that would threaten the very foundation of her marriage. "Hey everyone, are you Keisha Team Serafina or Dashi Team Adrian? Comment below. Just curious to see where everyone stands." A few weeks later, in a gilded ballroom at the Monarch Renaissance Hotel, Adrian stood among the city's elite. The event was a star-studded fundraiser supporting global literacy programs, hosted by well-known billionaires and philanthropic celebrities. Normally, Serafina would be at his side, but she had been called out of town to assist her ailing aunt. So Adrian navigated the swirling crowd of tuxedos and gowns alone, until a striking figure caught his eye. She was Eliana Moretti, a rising star in the nonprofit sphere. A long, raven-black braid fell over her shoulder, and her poised confidence was magnetic. Adrian recognized her from articles praising her foundation's efforts in East Africa and Southeast Asia. She was said to be brilliant, passionate, and uniquely adept at forging powerful alliances. With a graceful pivot, Eliana caught Adrian's glance. A subtle half-smile played across her lips. He felt an odd thrill flutter in his chest. Busy with guilt and excitement, he approached, hand extended. Adrian Blackwell, he introduced himself, though he doubted he needed to. Eliana Moretti, she replied, her voice low and inviting. I've heard your name more times than I can count. It's about time we met face to face. They spoke about philanthropic synergies, about bridging technology and grassroots activism. Their conversation flowed with unexpected ease. Though they discussed changing the world, an undercurrent of unspoken intensity coursed between them. When Adrian excused himself to deliver his keynote speech, he could still feel Eliana's assessing gaze following him to the stage. He gave a rousing presentation, weaving personal anecdotes with a vision for sustainable impact. The applause was resounding, but as he stepped down, his eyes instinctively searched for Eliana in the crowd, not Serafina. This realization jolted him, but he brushed it aside. It was merely professional interest, or so he told himself. After the event, Eliana caught him by the dessert table, praising his speech. Her admiration lit a spark he hadn't felt in years. They left together, walking down the lavish hotel corridor, the swirl of gilded wallpaper around them. He told himself it was purely a discussion about joint ventures, a harmless start to a new philanthropic endeavor. Type 1 if you sense trouble brewing, or 2 if you think they're just colleagues with big dreams. Let's hear your theories. In the following weeks, Adrian and Eliana exchanged emails at all hours. On paper, they spoke of budgets, strategic plans, and the potential for life-changing outreach programs. But the tone between them shifted gradually. Eliana's words brimmed with warmth and flattery, highlighting Adrian's brilliance in ways that made him forget his doubts. That intangible spark from their first meeting grew each time she texted him past midnight. Each time she ended her messages with a playful, "Sweet dreams." Each time she insisted that their combined influence could change the world. As for Serafina, she noticed Adrian's new zest, though it wasn't for her. She observed how he would pause mid-sentence to check his phone, smiling at the screen in a way he rarely did in her presence. The name Eliana appeared enough times for her to feel a pang of unease. Still, she tried to be understanding. Adrian thrived on big ideas, and new collaborations often exhilarated him. But something in her gut warned that Eliana was more than just a business associate. Determined to reconnect with her husband before it was too late, Serafina prepared a sumptuous, candlelit dinner one Friday night. Handmade pasta, his favorite artisanal bread, even the dessert he once claimed was like tasting heaven. She dressed in the emerald gown he'd always admired, hoping the memory of their earlier, simpler days might surface. Adrian walked in late, as he often did, tie askew and phone in hand. The elaborate table setup caught him off guard. With guilt simmering behind his eyes, he complimented her efforts. Yet his conversation remained halting. When his phone buzzed during dinner, Serafina noticed the faint curve of a smile tug at his lips, and her heart sank. She confronted him about his distracted behavior, her voice trembling between anger and sorrow. Adrian offered vague reassurances. He was on the cusp of something transformative for the Blackwell Foundation. Serafina tried to believe him, even if she felt the emotional gulf growing. That night, she cried herself to sleep, uncertain if their love was strong enough to survive whatever was coming next. Where are you tuning in from? Shout out your city or country. Let's see how global our audience is tonight. Serafina finally confided in her mother, a retired teacher who lived in a cozy cottage near Napa. Over tea, she laid bare her anxieties, the late-night messages, the emotional distance, her own fears of losing Adrian to a woman she'd never even met. Her mother, ever wise and patient, urged her to confront the situation head-on. Silence only deepens the cracks, she said, patting Serafina's hand. You deserve respect and honesty, my child. When, buoyed by her mother's advice, Serafina returned home determined to seek clarity. But Adrian was nowhere to be found, traveling again, presumably. In his absence, she immersed herself in a massive fundraiser for a local children's hospital, an event that had the potential to save countless lives. Late one afternoon, as she was finalizing donor lists at a downtown cafe, Serafina was approached by an unexpected figure, Gabriel Lee, a prominent tech entrepreneur who'd been making headlines for his ambitious expansions into sustainable energy. He introduced himself with a soft-spoken confidence that immediately put her at ease. She recognized him from business magazines and philanthropic events, though they had never spoken directly. Gabriel expressed admiration for her work, mentioning how he'd followed her charitable campaigns for a while. His sincerity shone through. He wasn't there to network or glean some advantage. He simply wanted to offer his support. That brief encounter left Serafina feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Truly seen. Gabriel's questions about her hospital initiative were thoughtful, his suggestions practical. He asked how she balanced public appearances with behind-the-scenes tasks. She found herself smiling, the ache of loneliness momentarily lifting. It was a stark contrast to the stilted conversations she'd been having with Adrian. When their meeting ended, Gabriel handed her his business card and said, "If you ever need advice, or just want someone to listen, don't hesitate to call." His eyes were steady, filled with genuine respect. She slipped the card into her purse, wondering if Adrian would be jealous, if he would care at all. Then again, maybe he wouldn't even notice. "Give me a quick pulse check. Comment, 'Still with you?' if you're following along, or pause if you need a recap." A turning point came when Adrian and Eliana were photographed together at a small rooftop soiree in San Francisco. On the surface, it seemed innocent, a shared embrace during a celebratory toast for a newly funded project. But the camera flash froze the moment in a way that oozed intimacy. The angle of their bodies, the look in Adrian's eyes, even the casual hand Eliana placed on his shoulder, it all suggested something far beyond a routine congratulations. By dawn the following day, whispers circulated through private social circles. The images appeared in a slick online column typically devoted to corporate intrigue and high society gossip. Though the article named no names, anyone in the philanthropic world could identify Adrian's tall, distinctive frame and Eliana's signature braid. Soon the photographs found their way to Serafina through a concerned text message from a friend. "Thought you should see this. I'm here for you if you need to talk." Serafina opened the link in a quiet corner of her living room. She stared at the pictures, her heart pounding like a drum. She'd suspected, she'd worried, she'd even prayed she was wrong. But there it was, captured in stark clarity. She sat frozen for a good 10 minutes, waves of anger, hurt, and a hollow sense of finality washing over her. Perhaps if Adrian had come to her first, she could have forgiven him for crossing emotional boundaries. But to learn about it this way, through a scandalous blog post, felt like a betrayal of the worst kind. When Adrian returned home later that evening, Serafina confronted him. Her voice quivered, yet her stance was resolute. He tried to dismiss the photos as misleading, a trick of lighting, pure speculation. But she'd already seen too many signs to accept a half-truth. The final blow came when she said in a heartbreakingly calm tone, "I'm not sure if I can trust you anymore." The magnitude of her words seemed to jolt Adrian. For the first time in a long while, real panic flickered across his face. He tried to reach for her hand, but she stepped away, tears burning at the edges of her eyes. Anyone else feeling Serafina's pain right now? Comment 3 if you've ever had a heartbreak that changed you. In the midst of this turmoil, Serafina attended a high-profile charity auction at the Grand Vista Museum. She had planned to skip it, given the swirl of rumors around her husband's indiscretion, but her presence was crucial for an ongoing pediatric care initiative. Struggling to keep her composure, she entered the grand hall of marble columns and Renaissance artwork, conscious of the sideways glances from acquaintances who had undoubtedly seen the gossip columns. During a break in the auction, as she was examining a rare sculptural piece, someone called her name. She turned to see Gabriel Lee, looking polished in a tailored suit and wearing an expression of genuine concern. "Serafina, are you all right?" he asked, guiding her gently away from the crowd. She mustered a wavering smile. "It's been a difficult week. The press seems to have a keen interest in me lately." He gave a slow nod, a compassionate look in his eyes. "I won't pretend I haven't heard the rumors, but I'm more interested in how you're holding up." It felt liberating to talk to someone who didn't probe for scandalous details. Gabriel asked about her current projects, listened with attentiveness, and offered to help in any way he could. The conversation lifted her spirits. For once, she didn't feel overshadowed by Adrian's drama. She felt respected, valued, and perhaps for the first time in months, something close to calm. When the auction concluded, Gabriel invited her to join him for a quick dinner at a quiet bistro nearby. Normally, she would have refused, fearing more gossip, but an instinct told her that the opinions of onlookers mattered less than preserving her own sanity. She accepted, and during that meal, surrounded by gentle lighting and the aroma of fresh herbs, Serafina began to rediscover her laughter. Later, as she said goodbye under the glow of street lamps, Gabriel pressed a simple question. "If you ever need to talk again, would you call me?" She promised she would. And in that fleeting moment, she realized her heart might be more open to new possibilities than she dared to imagine. Comment yes if you sense a new chapter unfolding for Serafina, or no if you think she should fight harder for Adrian. Meanwhile, Eliana Moretti found herself intoxicated by the power she was gaining. Having Adrian Blackwell's ear, and perhaps his heart, was more than a strategic move. It was a swift elevation into circles she had long coveted. The Luminosa initiative that Eliana championed benefited enormously from Adrian's endorsement, but in her sleek penthouse overlooking the bay, she dreamed of more than just philanthropic achievements. She wanted a permanent seat among the social elite, the kind of stability that came with a last name like Blackwell. She was no stranger to rumors of an unhappy wife at home. In whispered corners of her private events, she heard fleeting remarks about Serafina's heartbreak. Eliana dismissed these as inconsequential. The wave of the future belonged to those bold enough to take what they wanted. Even so, she knew better than to force Adrian's hand too quickly. The secret to her success was always to approach ambition with patience, turning up the heat in slow increments. Little did she realize, however, that a new factor had emerged: Gabriel Lee. Through the philanthropic grapevine, she heard that Serafina had been seen smiling, her eyes alight once more, in Gabriel's company. That tidbit unsettled her. The last thing she wanted was for Serafina to become a sympathetic figure who found solace in another powerful man's arms. Such a narrative could rob Eliana of the upper hand if Adrian ever wavered. For Adrian himself, guilt began to weigh heavily. Late one night, alone in his expansive home office, he stared at the reflections of the towering windows. His phone buzzed with yet another message from Eliana, some sweet goodnight text that made his pulse quicken, then sink with remorse. Across the hall, Serafina's empty side of the bed seemed to accuse him in silence. The more time he spent with Eliana, the more he felt he was stumbling into a labyrinth of deceit and temptation. Yet stepping away felt impossible too. Success, excitement, ego. These forces wove a spell around him. And so he stood at a crossroads, aware that every decision carried the power to either save or demolish everything he had painstakingly built. Who else thinks Adrian has dug himself too deep? Type 4 if you think it's beyond repair, or 5 if there's still hope. Things reached a breaking point when Serafina, determined to uphold her own dignity, confronted Adrian with the infamous rooftop photograph. She demanded honesty, asking him to level with her about his relationship with Eliana. Adrian insisted it was merely professional, a misinterpreted snapshot, but the flicker in his eyes and the mounting evidence told another story. Serafina turned away, tears threatening to spill. She knew this facade could not last. In the days that followed, she and Adrian maintained an uneasy truce at home, coexisting in the same luxurious mansion, but scarcely speaking. Serafina devoted herself to final preparations for a pediatric fundraiser, while Adrian claimed to be finalizing a groundbreaking philanthropic project with international partners. They seemed locked in parallel lives, brushing past each other like strangers in a museum. Then one night, a friend discreetly forwarded Serafina a photo that made her heart pound for a different reason. It depicted Gabriel Lee kneeling, ring box in hand, his gaze lifted to meet her own, in an expression of unwavering devotion. A local journalist had snapped the picture at an after-party event, capturing what looked like a surprise marriage proposal. The reality was more nuanced. Gabriel had spontaneously expressed his feelings, not expecting an immediate answer. But in the photograph, the intensity was unmistakable. Serafina stared at the image, astounded. The entire world, it seemed, now believed she was being offered a new life by a wealthy, influential man. Flooded by conflicting emotions, gratitude, fear, a cautious spark of hope, she still felt deeply torn. On the one hand, Adrian was her husband, the man she had loved fiercely, even if he'd betrayed her. On the other, Gabriel represented a fresh promise of genuine connection, a chance for respect she desperately craved. Adrian saw that viral photo too, almost simultaneously. For the first time, he felt a visceral panic, a realization that his indiscretion might cost him everything. The possibility that Serafina could leave him for someone stronger, kinder, and perhaps more deserving ignited a firestorm of regret he had never before experienced. Let's get a quick poll. 6, if you believe in second chances. 7, if you think Serafina should walk away. The next morning, Serafina stood in the sunlit foyer, her posture confident despite the nerves dancing in her stomach. In her hand was a letter she'd written the night before, a letter that captured what she had been too afraid to voice. Adrian stepped into the hallway, surprise etched on his features. They locked eyes. This was the moment of reckoning. She offered him the sealed envelope. "This doesn't have to be dramatic," she said, her voice steady, "but it has to be honest." He tore it open, hands trembling as he read her carefully penned words. "Adrian, I waited, believing you'd return to me. I hoped, praying the tenderness we once shared would triumph. But each day, you gave less of yourself. I stayed silent when I should have screamed. You say you didn't cheat with your body, but you cheated with your time, your emotion, your care. Every moment you offered to someone else was taken from us, and you left our love to starve. Now there's nothing left to salvage. You showed me love can vanish when neglected, and someone else showed me it can flourish with truth. I wish you well, but I can no longer be part of this charade." By the time Adrian lifted his eyes, she was already turning away. "Serafina," he choked out, desperation lacing his tone. But she slipped through the door, leaving him in the echo of an empty hallway. He knew deep in his heart that he had orchestrated his own downfall. Across town, Gabriel awaited Serafina in a modest rooftop garden known only to a few. The hush of the morning air felt like a gentle cloak around them. She arrived with tears still shining on her cheeks, her breath unsteady. He greeted her not with an outstretched ring, but with open arms, offering a quiet solace free from any pressure. "I'm not ready to say yes," she confessed, voice trembling, "but I'm ready to stop saying no to myself." He nodded, respecting her need for caution. In that private haven above the city, their hands found each other's. It was not a fairy tale climax, but a tender beginning free from the lies and illusions that had haunted her marriage. So, lovely readers, do you think Serafina made the right move? Hit that like if you support her decision, or share your thoughts in the comments. In the days that followed, Adrian's carefully manicured life crumbled. Eliana Moretti, ever the strategist, realized that with Serafina gone, Adrian lost not just a devoted wife, but also the moral anchor that had made him admirable in public eyes. Gossip spread about how Serafina might soon become engaged to Gabriel Lee, a more empathetic, transparent leader, some said. Investors, once dazzled by Adrian's every move, started questioning the stability of the Blackwell empire. Eliana, sensing the wind-changing direction, subtly distanced herself from Adrian in public. Determined to salvage his reputation, Adrian made an impassioned bid to reconcile with Serafina. He sent flowers, left voicemails, wrote tearful apologies. But her resolve stood firm. She could forgive, perhaps, but she could not return to the life she'd endured. With Gabriel's patient understanding, she found a healthier sense of self-worth. One crisp morning, she joined Gabriel at a charity event celebrating advancements in pediatric healthcare, an event she had helped organize. While cameras flashed incessantly, capturing their every interaction, they stayed focused on the work, raising funds and awareness for children in need. That clarity of purpose reminded Serafina why she had once loved philanthropy and why she had stayed in her marriage as long as she did. When you believe in something bigger than yourself, you fight for it, until you realize you're the only one fighting. Adrian watched from afar, overshadowed by regret. Perhaps if he had recognized the moment Serafina's eyes had first begun to dim, he could have saved them both from this heartbreak. But some mistakes he learned too late, carved wounds too deep for easy healing. Despite the swirling rumors, Serafina remained cautious about any formal engagement with Gabriel. She needed time to heal, to rediscover life without the constant pang of betrayal. Still, each day brought small joys, open, unguarded conversations, laughter over simple dinners, the comfort of knowing someone genuinely cared. She felt the cracks in her heart slowly begin to mend. And so ended the era of illusions and secrets. Sometimes a single act, a single hug, or a single proposal can unravel a life's tapestry or stitch it back together. Serafina chose renewal over despair, a step taken with trembling hope but unwavering courage.